boy, I have a game for you. I've been talking a lot about games lately that take quite a few plays to just kind of get an understanding of and find an appreciation for. Now, this is the opposite there. This game here hit me like a ton of bricks. I got it to the table and absolutely love this thing. Quick side note before we get into things, this is a review copy, so bias alert, I suppose. And the game we're talking about is SEERS Catalog. No, not that type of Seers, the Seer, the person. I think a Seer is essentially, I think I looked this up this morning. A Seer is kind of like a clairvoyant, I suppose. You're in this, looks like a retro world where werewolves still exist, and you're shopping through a catalog, and there's highly thematic cards and flavor text on items that can help, I guess, defend you against a werewolf. The game is designed by Taylor Reiner. He has a trick-taking channel, literally a trick-taking channel, Taylor's Trick-Taking Table. Go check that out. It's a wonderful, quirky channel. And, you know, of course, he brought us a wonderful, quirky game. At its core, this is a climbing shedding game. If you haven't played a climbing shedding game, typically players can play different melds of cards or different sets of cards. Each game does it in a slightly different way, but really what you're doing is you're following the lead player, whatever meld they decide to play, and play something, really anything that's higher in the same meld. So in the instance that somebody leads with a 1, you could play a 2 or above. This game is very much like that. In fact, it's a really simple version of any sort of climbing, shedding game that you've played in the past. Players can lead with either a single or sets of cards or a suited run. That's basically it. You know, you play tricks until people pass and then clear the trick and keep playing. Typically in climbing, shedding games, the goal is to go out first. And that's sort of true, but not really. We'll actually get into that. Another thing that typical climbing shedding games do, and is the kind of, at least for me, one of the more interesting purveyors of interest, is this idea of playing bombs. Bombs are kind of a special set of cards that is slightly less likely than the normal melds that the game asks for, that would then have you trump whatever another player had led with. It's a strategic way for a player to win a trick, and most importantly, take control of the game and be able to lead in the next trick. And with SEERS Catalog, that's not really there whatsoever. The purveyor of interest here, or at least one of them, comes in the form of artifact cards. With artifact cards, 2 are dealt to each player every time. There's a wide variety of them. During your first game, you play with more basic versions, and as you play, you can mix in whatever you want. The abilities range from things like going first, or leading the next trick no matter who wins, or changing the suit on your card, to some things that are a little bit more exotic, like being able to play again immediately, not having to have the trick go around the table. You can essentially play twice in a row, getting rid of cards faster, of course, so that feels pretty awesome. To even cards like Unique Meld that allows you to play bomb-like combinations. There's a wide variety of these cards. All of them are very interesting. You get a new set, like I said, every single hand, which basically gives you a new strategy on your hand every single time you play. Now, you might be thinking, that,
Yeah, that leads to some interest. They're only one-time use cards, so how impactful are they going to be? You're still stuck with what is, at its core, a really simple version of a climber.
And frankly, you'd be right. Until you try to score. See, once you're under 6 cards, you flip this token. This token now puts you in the bonus. You're now able to score the lowest card in your hand whenever somebody goes out. This does 2 things. Number 1, it makes you not want to be the first out in most hands. When comparing to most other climbing shedding games, this is a complete difference, and actually much harder than it sounds. This also makes you want to play the lowest cards as quickly as possible, because of course you're scoring the lowest card that's left in your hand. This becomes difficult in a climbing game, a game in which you always have to play higher than the next person, so it's just an added challenge. So you might be thinking,
You just have cards left in your hand, you get rid of the lowest ones, you know, what's the big deal?
Well, the big deal comes in the second condition in scoring your points, because every single card in your hand is 1 negative point at the end of a round. So if somebody's rushed the end and gone out and you have a bunch of cards sitting in your hand, you're stuck with a ton of negative points.
Okay, so why don't you just whittle down your hand and try to make the lowest card as close as possible to 13?
Well, you'd think so. However, the condition on flipping this token to the bonus side is you can no longer pass when you want to, meaning if you have a valid play, you have to make it. So you can't just sit there with a couple cards in your hand, just keeping the really high cards and then looking and waiting for somebody else to go out. Not realizing this in my early plays, I took what was a really great hand that had a lot of high cards that could be played together, took over and started playing, and then was left with 11 and 12 in my hand and played the 11. And guess what? Nobody else could play. So then I had the lead the next time, and then I had to play the 12, and then I went out. So you'd think
that's a bad thing, right?
Sort of. It depends. One of the other players had a ton of cards left in their hand, giving them a bunch of negative points. So effectively, I scored points by scoring 0 points. However, another player was allowed to kind of creep along with me, and they're left with 3 cards in their hand, the lowest being a 5. So they actually got 2 points because they were in the bonus. They got the 5 points and only had to remove 3 of them, leaving them with 2. So they're actually winning, even though I went out first. This was the aha moment for me when I started to look at this and go like, wow, that was actually hard. I can't just keep the highest cards because those are the most likely to me having to play and nobody else can play on top of. So maybe the strategy needs to be keeping middle tier cards and whittling down your hand just enough, but not too fast. That's what this game presents. That is the hook. The big hook is this is a giant paradox. You want to get rid of your cards, but not too fast. You want to try to get rid of your low cards, but if you only keep the highest cards, they're likely to make you go out first and score 0 points. But if you're too timid, you're going to be left in the dust and have a bunch of cards left over, which is a bunch of negative points. So a valid strategy is, in some cases, to go out as quickly as possible if you can catch the other players around the table with a bunch of negative points sitting in their hands. All of this is completely flipped on its head when you take into account all of the different artifact cards, what somebody might have in their hand. They could give lead to somebody, as an example. There's cards that just act as the highest card played. There's so many different things that can come out of those artifact cards. And if you see those cards sitting in somebody's hand, which they have different backs, you can see if they still have their artifacts and obviously count them because everyone starts with 2. There's a ton of possibilities that happen with this game. There is a different strategy every single hand. In most climbers, I'm looking for a progression of cards in which I can play in big melds, maybe even those bombs or special melds that I can play to take over a trick, and strategically wanting to use them at the best time possible to take over and then just run the table and get rid of my cards. That is so much more simple than what this game asks you to do. This game asks you to make a decision on, can you rush the end and leave everyone with negative points, or is somebody going to stick there close enough to you to actually beat you if you rush the end? And on top of all of that, all plans are laid to waste with those artifact cards because you just don't know what somebody else is holding at any given time. This game could basically be described as one giant paradox, one in which I really enjoyed and I want to return to time and time again. I haven't played a ton of climbing and shedding games. Just for your reference, some of my favorites right this second are Haggis and Bacon. I absolutely love those. Also love 535. This one is kind of like the next level for me. It's really, once you kind of get bored of what is, I guess, a typical climbing shedding game, this is for that connoisseur. With all of that said, if you're not a big climbing shedding game, or you don't know what it is, I absolutely recommend trying this game. I don't just blindly recommend a lot of games, but the thing is so cheap. It's just so easy to go and try out. Just try it. I think, you and your game group have a high chance of liking it unless you absolutely hate climbing shedding games. But this is still so much different. So you still might like this.
I don't know what I'm saying.
With all of that said, if you've made it this far, thank you. I really appreciate it. And have yourself a great day.